What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits across from a talk show host who thinks he can play gotcha journalism, only to get completely dismantled on live television? Tonight, we witnessed something extraordinary as Denzel Washington walked into what was supposed to be a friendly chat on The Late Show, but instead found himself facing an ambush that would backfire spectacularly. Before we dive into this incredible clash, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're about to witness one of the most intense late-night moments ever captured on camera. The stage was set like any other evening at The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The familiar blue backdrop, the perfectly positioned cameras, and an audience expecting their usual dose of liberal comedy mixed with softball celebrity interviews. Denzel Washington, dressed in his signature understated elegance, a charcoal gray suit that spoke of quiet confidence, walked onto the stage with that characteristic stride that commanded respect without demanding it. The audience erupted in applause, genuinely excited to see the two-time Academy Award winner. Colbert, wearing his trademark smirk and navy blue suit, stood to greet his guest with what appeared to be warmth, but anyone paying close attention could see something different in his eyes tonight. There was a predatory gleam, the look of someone who had done his homework and was ready to pounce. As they shook hands, Colbert's grip lingered just a moment too long, his smile just a bit too wide. "Denzel Washington, everybody," Colbert announced to the crowd as they settled into their seats. The camera captured both men in a wide shot before zooming in on their faces, creating an intimate setting that would soon become a battlefield. "Thank you for having me, Stephen," Denzel replied, his voice carrying that familiar gravitas that had made him one of the most compelling actors of his generation. He adjusted himself in the guest chair, a piece of furniture that had hosted everyone from presidents to pop stars. But tonight it felt more like a witness stand. Colbert opened with what seemed like standard pleasantries. "You know, Denzel, I have to say, you look fantastic. How do you do it? What's your secret to staying so sharp after all these years in Hollywood?" Denzel chuckled, a sound that was both warm and slightly cautious. "Well, Stephen, I try to stay grounded, you know. Faith, family, hard work. The usual things that keep a man centered." "Faith," Colbert repeated, leaning forward slightly. "That's interesting. You're quite vocal about your Christian beliefs, aren't you? In an industry that's not exactly known for its, shall we say, traditional values?" The first subtle jab had been thrown, disguised as curiosity but loaded with implication. Denzel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a barely perceptible straightening that suggested he was beginning to understand the nature of this conversation. "I am who I am, Stephen. My faith isn't something I hide or apologize for. It's what grounds me, what gives me purpose beyond just entertaining people." Of course," Colbert nodded, his tone still conversational but with an edge creeping in. "But don't you think there's a certain contradiction there? I mean, you've made millions playing characters who engage in violence, who kill people on screen. How do you reconcile that with your Christian values?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The audience, sensing the shift in tone, grew quieter. This wasn't the light-hearted celebrity chat they had expected. Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in recognition. He was being challenged, questioned in a way that felt more like a prosecution than an interview. "Stephen, I think you're confusing the messenger with the message," Denzel replied, his voice steady, but with a new intensity. "I'm an actor. I tell stories. Some of those stories involve conflict, violence, moral complexity. That doesn't make me those characters any more than you playing a conservative pundit on Comedy Central made you actually conservative." Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in his carefully constructed persona. The reference to his old Colbert Report character was a direct hit, a reminder that he too had made his career playing roles that weren't necessarily reflective of his true self. "That's different though, isn't it?" Colbert pressed on, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. "I was doing satire, commentary. You're glorifying violence, making it seem heroic, even noble sometimes. Don't you think that has an impact on society, especially on young people who look up to you?" The attack was more direct now, the pretense of friendly conversation completely abandoned. Colbert was going for the jugular, attempting to paint Denzel as a hypocrite who preached morality while profiting from violence. It was the kind of gotcha moment that late-night hosts dreamed of, the viral clip that would dominate social media and cement their reputation as fearless interviewers willing to ask the tough questions. But Denzel Washington had not become one of the most respected actors of his generation by backing down from challenges. If anything, the direct confrontation seemed to energize him, bringing out the same intensity he brought to his most powerful roles. "Stephen, let me ask you something," Denzel said, leaning forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a more serious register. "Have you ever actually watched my films? I mean, really watched them, not just scanned through them looking for gotcha moments?" Colbert blinked, clearly not expecting the question to be turned back on him. "Of course I have. I'm a fan of your work. That's why I'm asking these questions." "Are you really?" Denzel's tone was skeptical, his eyes locked on Colbert's face, reading him like a script. "Because if you had actually watched my films, you'd know that violence in my movies isn't glorified. It has consequences. Characters suffer for their choices. The violence serves a purpose in telling a story about morality, about right and wrong, about the cost of our actions." The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual back-and-forth banter between host and guest. This was a masterclass in how to dismantle an ambush interview, and Denzel was just getting started. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds of dead air, a lifetime in television. Colbert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confident smirk beginning to crack under Denzel's unwavering gaze. The host had expected a defensive response, maybe some stammering about artistic license or the nature of entertainment. Instead, he found himself being psychoanalyzed by one of the greatest actors of all time. "Take Training Day, for example," Denzel continued, his voice gaining momentum like a freight train building speed. "Did you see that movie, Stephen? Really see it? Because Alonzo isn't the hero. He's the villain. The entire film is about how corruption destroys everything it touches. How power without moral foundation leads to destruction. By the end, he's isolated, paranoid, and ultimately dies because of his choices. Where exactly is the glorification in that?" Colbert tried to regain control of the interview. "Well, sure, but you played him with such charisma, such magnetism. People loved Alonzo. They quoted his lines. They admired his swagger. And that bothers you?" Denzel's eyebrows raised slightly. "That an actor can make a villain compelling? That's called acting, Stephen. That's the craft. If I played Alonzo as a mustache-twirling cartoon character, what would the audience learn? Nothing. But when you make evil charismatic, when you show how seductive corruption can be, you're teaching people to recognize it in real life." The camera operators were having a field day. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and every subtle expression change was being captured in crystal clarity. Colbert's producer, visible in the background, looked like he was having a panic attack. This was not going according to plan. "That's a very convenient interpretation," Colbert shot back, his voice taking on a more combative edge. "But let's talk about some of your other roles. Man on Fire, The Equalizer series, American Gangster. These are characters who solve their problems with violence, who take justice into their own hands, and audiences cheer for them. Don't you see the problem with that messaging?" Denzel leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile a chess master might give when his opponent has just walked into a trap. "Stephen, I'm starting to think you don't actually watch movies. You just read Wikipedia summaries and think that makes you qualified to critique cinema." The words were delivered with surgical precision, each one calculated to cut deep. Man on Fire isn't about glorifying violence. It's about a broken man finding redemption through sacrifice. The Equalizer isn't about vigilante justice. It's about using strength to protect the innocent. These are moral tales, Stephen. They're about standing up for what's right when the system fails. The audience began to murmur, sensing the shift in momentum. What had started as an ambush interview was rapidly becoming a public dismantling of the host by his guest. Colbert's face was beginning to show strain, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "But you're making these moral judgments," Colbert pressed on, his voice getting slightly higher, a sure sign he was losing control. "You're deciding who deserves justice and who doesn't. Isn't that exactly the kind of thinking that leads to real-world violence? People thinking they know better than the law? Stephen, Denzel said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the studio to lean in to hear him. Are you seriously sitting there, on national television, and suggesting that fictional characters making moral choices in extreme circumstances somehow encourages real-world vigilantism? I'm suggesting that media has influence, that celebrities have responsibility, Colbert replied, but his voice lacked conviction now. He was starting to sound like he was reading from talking points rather than engaging in genuine discourse. Media has influence, Denzel agreed, nodding slowly. Which brings me to an interesting point. What influence do you think you're having right now? You invited me here under the pretense of a friendly interview, but instead you're trying to ambush me with accusations disguised as questions. You're trying to paint me as some kind of hypocrite for the entertainment of your audience. What message does that send, Stephen? The question landed like a haymaker. Colbert's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The host who made his living asking pointed questions suddenly found himself on the receiving end of an inquiry he couldn't deflect or joke away. I'm doing my job, Colbert stammered. I'm asking the tough questions that people want answered. Are you? Denzel's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. Or are you performing? Are you creating controversy for ratings? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you came into this interview with an agenda. You wanted to create a moment, didn't you? You wanted to be the guy who took down Denzel Washington. The accuracy of the observation was written all over Colbert's face. His carefully constructed plan was being dissected in real time, and he was powerless to stop it. The hunter had become the hunted, and the audience was beginning to realize it. That's not, I just think it's important to examine, Colbert began. But Denzel cut him off. To examine what, Stephen? My character? My integrity? Based on what? Movies I've made? Roles I've played? Denzel leaned forward again, his intensity filling the space between them. Let me tell you what I think needs examining. I think we need to examine a culture where a talk show host thinks it's acceptable to invite a guest onto his show and then attempt to assassinate their character for entertainment. The word assassinate hung in the air like a thunderclap. It was a strong word, chosen deliberately, and it perfectly captured what everyone in the studio was witnessing. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was an execution, but not the one Colbert had planned. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. Colbert sat frozen, his trademark wit completely abandoned, faced with an opponent who had not only anticipated his attack, but had turned it into a masterclass on media manipulation and personal integrity. The host's carefully planned ambush had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly, and now he was the one being exposed on his own show. Stephen, can I ask you something personal? Denzel's voice had taken on an almost conversational tone, which somehow made it even more dangerous. The sudden shift from confrontation to intimacy was disarming, like a boxer dropping his guard just before delivering a knockout punch. Sure, Colbert managed, though every instinct was probably telling him to deflect, to make a joke, to change the subject. But he was trapped now, caught between his professional obligation to continue the interview and his personal desire to escape the situation he had created. When you wake up in the morning, when you look in the mirror, are you proud of what you do for a living? The question was delivered with genuine curiosity, not malice, which made it even more devastating. Do you feel good about making a career out of tearing people down, of creating division, of turning human beings into political talking points? Colbert's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, defensiveness, and something that might have been shame. We do comedy here, we entertain people, we provide commentary on current events. Do you, though? Denzel pressed gently. Because what I'm experiencing right now doesn't feel like comedy. It doesn't feel like entertainment. It feels like you trying to destroy my reputation based on nothing more than your own political biases and your need for viral moments. The camera caught Colbert swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Sweat was now clearly visible on his forehead, and his hands were fidgeting with his note cards in a way that screamed nervousness to anyone paying attention. You know what I find interesting, Stephen? Denzel continued, his tone remaining maddeningly calm. You've spent this entire interview trying to question my integrity, my values, my impact on society, but you've never once asked me about the positive work I do. You've never mentioned the Boys and Girls Club, the scholarship programs, the mentoring, the charity work. Why is that? Well, we can certainly talk about that, Colbert offered weakly, grasping for any lifeline that might save the interview. Can we? Really? Denzel's skepticism was palpable. Because that wasn't in your notes, was it? That wasn't part of your plan. Your plan was to come after me, to try to make me look bad, to score points with your audience by taking down someone who doesn't share your worldview. The accuracy of this assessment was written all over Colbert's face. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For a man who made his living with words, the silence was deafening. You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? Denzel asked, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had completely won the battle. You had an opportunity tonight. You had one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sitting in that chair. Someone with decades of experience. Someone who's worked with legends. Someone who could have shared incredible stories and insights. Instead, you chose to turn it into an ambush. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This had become something far more significant than a late-night talk show segment. It was a teachable moment about integrity, about respect, about the difference between journalism and performance art. I came here tonight in good faith, Denzel continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine disappointment. I came here to talk about my work, my life. Maybe share some laughs with your audience. Instead, I find myself having to defend my character against attacks based on fictional roles I've played. Do you see how absurd that is? Colbert finally found his voice, though it was noticeably weaker than when the interview began. These are legitimate questions about the responsibility of artists. Are they? Denzel's response was swift and sharp. Or are they just talking points you pulled from some progressive blog to try to make me look bad? Because, Stephen, if you really wanted to discuss the responsibility of artists, we could have had that conversation. But that would have required treating me with respect, doing actual research, and engaging in genuine dialogue rather than performing for your cameras. The devastating critique hung in the air. Colbert looked like a man who had brought a knife to a gunfight and was only now realizing how outmatched he was. His usual arsenal of jokes, deflections, and snark was completely useless against Denzel's calm, measured dismantling of his character. You want to talk about responsibility, Stephen? Let's talk about yours. You have a platform that reaches millions of people every night. You have influence. You have power. And you choose to use it to ambush guests, to create division, to score cheap political points. What message does that send? What impact does that have on our culture? The tables had been completely turned. The interrogator had become the interrogated, and Denzel was conducting a masterclass in how to expose someone's true character without losing his composure or dignity. I think, Colbert began, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should take a commercial break. Should we? Denzel asked, raising an eyebrow. Or should we finish what you started? You wanted to question my integrity, my values, my impact on society. Well, here I am, Stephen. Ask me anything you want. But this time, try asking real questions instead of accusations disguised as journalism. Colbert looked toward his producers, clearly seeking an escape from the situation he had created, but there was nowhere to run. He had started this confrontation on live television, and now he had to finish it. I apologize if you feel that my questions were unfair, Colbert offered, but even his apology sounded rehearsed and insincere. Stephen, Denzel said, his voice carrying a finality that suggested the conversation was over. I don't feel that your questions were unfair. I know they were, and so does everyone watching this right now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The challenge was clear, and Colbert had no answer. The man who had built his career on having the last word sat speechless, completely outclassed by a guest who had turned his own show into a lesson about integrity, respect, and the difference between real journalism and manufactured controversy. As the cameras continued to roll, capturing every uncomfortable second, It was clear that this wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a complete shutdown, a masterful demonstration of how to handle an ambush with grace, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. Denzel Washington had walked into Stephen Colbert's trap and turned it into his own triumph. What did you think of this incredible display of composure under fire? Have you ever seen a guest completely turn the tables on a host like this? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing moments like this one.